marketing and humor. Not something we talk about a ton, but it's a topic that is personally interesting to me. And so I wanted to, get that. Oh, perfect. And Jody's got perfume on, which once, Zoom and Meet upgrade their audio factory or olfactory systems, we'll be able to smell that. So thanks for the good smells. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start this off with a warning and say that I am not a licensed comedian. I don't do this for a living. I'm a marketer, but I only dabble in humor. So I'm not going to guarantee that you guys are going to laugh today. So sorry for anybody came expecting like a stand-up routine. I like to think of myself as funny, but not necessarily. This is more of a semi-serious look at of how we can implement marketing into humor into our marketing brands. So definitely a lot of tips and tricks and maybe some little chuckles along the way, but I don't know. I just want to set everybody's expectations low so that we can, easily exceed that. So thanks everybody. Oh yeah, so sorry if anybody wants to leave now because it's not not what you expected. Fair enough. But wanted to go ahead and start with maybe the good news of marketing and humor. Unless Michael Scott has something to say about that. I don't know if anybody else finds this funny, but I certainly do. Because of course we want to start with the bad news first, right? And the bad news is being funny is kind of hard. The people who do it really well, the comedians, who are at the top of their game, make it look really easy, but it genuinely takes work, which isn't always fun to hear up front because it should be, we think of humor as light and funny and easy, but it genuinely takes a lot of work to get there. And there are a lot of stand-up comics like Jim Gaffigan is really renowned for how much he studies and how much time and effort he takes into crafting his jokes so that when he gets up on stage and just kind of looks like he's loosey-goosey, it comes across that way. So if you want to be funny, you'd be willing to put in the work. Humor is also inherently a risk. You have to know that going in that it can backfire. It might not go well, and you have to kind of acknowledge that and recognize that up front if you want to, again, take the risk of trying to be funny. And of course, as we're going to look at some examples here, sometimes it can still be funny if it backfires, just not as much for you. It may not be as good for your brand, but we want to make sure that it's done in a way that's careful and appropriate, but still makes everybody laugh, right? So again, just a word of warning, like right up front. You want to approach this with caution, but again, you have to be willing to risk something, or otherwise it's just not going to be funny. So there's a fine line between being offensive and being clever, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But just acknowledge that up front, that humor takes work, and humor is going to be inherently risky. So I wanted to talk through a little bit about that, some of the examples of some marketing campaigns that tried to include humor that didn't go so well, maybe. Absolute Vodka, I think, is one that a lot of people are familiar with. It's a pretty well-known brand, and I think it was about circa 2006 that they had this print ad campaign that was going after Mexican pride and Mexican heritage. It was right around all that. They just, they wanted to put together this ad and say, look, when Absolute Vodka's around, Mexico looks like it, has taken over the United States. And I guess they didn't do their homework and didn't realize that there is a strong, Mexican faction in Mexico that actually wants to invade the United States. And this ad campaign genuinely caused some tension along the Mexican-American border. And there's been other tension that we don't need to get into around that. But yeah, this genuinely caused a huge backlash, and they had to apologize and rescind this whole campaign and all that kind of stuff. So they thought that they were kind of being clever with this, and I guess they didn't really realize all the implications that it could have. In a very similar and similarly racially insensitive one, this was 2002. Abercrombie & Fitch rolled out a line of T-shirts that were aimed at Asian American Heritage Day that were not so kind, and they again had to apologize and basically take these off the shelves, and I think they lost a lot of money and obviously had a lot of backlash and all that kind of stuff. So this was not as good a one. Again, trying to do humor, and maybe some people thought these were funny, but there was quite a few more people who did not find these so funny. So again, you have to be kind of aware of that. And then this one was actually one that could have gone poorly, but actually went pretty well. KFC, this was, I think, just a couple of years ago when they ran out of chicken at a lot of their stores. And so they ran this print ad campaign that actually was kind of funny. You know, definitely risky, definitely kind of had the risk of maybe offending some people, but it went well. And I think identified one of the real reasons why, you know, between the first two examples that went poorly and the one that went well was really that KFC was poking fun at themselves. They were being willing to put themselves on the line and risk their own reputation rather than poking fun at somebody else and making fun of somebody else's heritage or culture. They turned it inwards and said, hey, we're going to risk our own credibility here, but we're going to own up to it and be transparent. So I think that was one of the good lessons, that how you can, again, be risky, but don't risk, you know, don't risk somebody else's credibility, risk your own. Okay, so now that we've kind of gotten some of the bad stuff out of the way, can we go ahead and talk about some of the good things and some of the reasons we might want to be willing to risk being funny in our marketing? And so Senior Chang, who may also be a little bit racially insensitive, I don't know, he will allow us to do that. So the good news is people remember you when you're funny. I think somebody dropped a couple comments in there when we showed the KFC ad or some of these things that you guys maybe remembered some of these campaigns. And we're going to look at a few more examples of some that you guys may also remember. So being funny, when you do it well, when you weigh the risks and all that kind of stuff, it will help you stand out. Boring marketing is unfortunately the default, because when you play it safe, it's just kind of boring and straight, and that's okay. But if you are willing to risk a little bit more, willing to stand out a little bit more, or willing to be a little bit funnier, you may actually stand out and you may stick in people's brains. Humor also gives you a little bit of a personality. Again, bland and boring just kind of goes by the wayside, but if you are willing to kind of be a little bit tongue-in-cheek and be willing to take a little bit of a risk, your brand feels a little bit more like a person. Your brand feels a little bit more humane, and people can see, oh, you know, they're willing to be transparent. They're willing to apologize for some of the stuff. Like, it gives you a little bit of just more credibility and approachability when you're willing to be a little funny. Again, because people know that takes a risk. I mean, just in general, people love to laugh. I think that's one of the reasons why maybe you guys showed up to listen to this, is because, I don't know, we need a little bit more funny, and we need people who are willing to take those risks to stand out and be funny. And also, just from a marketing standpoint, people love to share those things, right? Nobody's going to share your, I don't know, car commercial or your print ad that is just talking about your features or anything like that. That doesn't really inspire, you know, that may convince somebody to buy something, but it's not really necessarily going to convince them to share it with all their friends. But if there's your commercial that really makes you laugh, then you're going to be a lot more willing to share that with people that you like. So let's take a look at a couple more examples, good examples of some brands that use humor well. And got a commercial here. This was the one video that I wanted to share because this one was quite funny.
Ship my pants. Right here? Ship my pants, you're kidding. You can ship your pants right here. You hear that? I can ship my pants for free.
Wow, I just may ship my pants.
Yeah, ship your pants. Billy, you ship your pants too.
I can't wait to ship my pants, Dad.
I just ship my pants, and it's very convenient.
Very convenient.
I just ship my drawers.
I just ship my 90.
I just shipped my bed. If you can't find what you're looking for in store, we'll find it at Kmart.com right now and ship it to you for free.
So hopefully you guys could hear that. I was watching Bobby. He seemed like he enjoyed that commercial. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have seen that before. That was one of the first things that I actually remembered when I was putting this together, because I remember when that commercial came out a little while ago. And yeah, I mean, it was definitely risky, Emery. It definitely may have rubbed some people the wrong way, but I think this was actually when Kmart was getting ready to declare bankruptcy, or they had just declared bankruptcy. And so they were willing to kind of put it all out there and take a little bit of a risk. And yeah, I mean, it was a very basic idea, a pretty simple one, to just, hey, ship sounds kind of like another word, and we can kind of play around with that. So yeah, it was a little bit edgy and a little bit out there, but again, it stuck in my brain. I think it stuck in a lot of people's minds when this came out. I mean, I think like 15 years ago. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It was funny to me, and I think it actually did a lot of really good things for Kmart when it came out. It was, again, just focused on one little feature that they did, but it was quite funny. On a similar note, I guess there's a lot of poop humor. But when we had a toilet paper shortage a couple years ago, this little company called Tushy that makes bidets. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Again, kind of an out there product, kind of an interesting little thing. They put out a little booklet that talked about how their product worked, and it kind of was a little funny, the title. And they put out merchandise that, again, kind of risky, kind of out there, a little bit different, but yeah, it actually has worked for them. They've grown a lot in the past couple of years. So yeah, I mean, again, they were just being very self-aware. They're like, hey, this is the kind of company we are, and they've got really good marketing. If you look at their social media platforms or any of that kind of stuff, their website, it's filled with toilet humor, because that's what they do, and they realize that and they recognize it and they just lean into it. And so if lowbrow humor is your thing, they just like, that's their brand. So perhaps shooting one. Yes, exactly. See, they have endless amount of humor and endless amount of ideas at their disposal. And so, yeah, it's just kind of funny. Again, it's hard to be able to do that, and it's hard to be able to insert that into your brand if it's not already part of who you are. But again, we'll find little ways that we can learn about how to implement humor in your brand in just a second. But I just thought it was a really good example and really funny. So I've got one more to share with you guys. I don't know if you guys are familiar with or have ever heard of the Savannah Bananas. There's a minor league baseball team in Savannah, Georgia, not too far from us in Atlanta. But they've sold out like every game for the past like 4 or 5 years. And part of it's because of this guy who wears a yellow tuxedo to every single game and has a microphone and leads chants and all that kind of stuff. And he also happens to be the owner of the baseball team. And he's like now writing books, and he's done all these kind of stuff, talking about how different they are. And they've actually done a lot of other things with marketing that are really, really fun. But yeah, I don't know. They were different, and I thought that they were interesting because they just really embraced their craziness. They have actually like different rules around some of their games. And again, he's out there, he's the owner, he's in a yellow tuxedo. Like, people may not take him seriously, but he's just like, that's who we are. That's part of their brand. It's just finding ways to be different and unique. And again, it may be a little risky. They do certain things with their business that other baseball teams or other sports teams may not do, because it causes a little bit of a risk. But again, people are intrigued by them. They remember them because they stand out. And I think a little bit of that is just because they're willing to be a little self-deprecating, to be a little funny and all that. And you guys have been dropping some other mentions of some other brands and all that kind of stuff that's out there. There were so many others that I could have put into this presentation. We could sit and talk for another hour or two just about all the examples that are out there. I just wanted to provide a couple examples that we could kind of learn lessons from. But yeah, thank you for dropping the other ideas for some of the other, again, crazy funny marketing examples out there. So now that we've looked at some examples of brands that are funny, let's talk a little bit about how to actually implement that. How can you actually be funny in your marketing? And yeah, surprise, because really when you boil down humor, it's about the unexpected. That's what most jokes are based on. They're based on building up a pattern of something and then breaking that pattern. So that's what most humor at its core really is. And this is the kind of serious and not as funny part, but it's, I mean, like that's the philosophy behind humor, is anytime that you can set up people's expectations and then like drive them off a cliff because that was not what they expected. So find little ways to do that. But again, I think anytime you look at any of these examples, either that I shared or that you can think of in your own life, like that's why they're funny ultimately, is just because you assumed one thing or they set up some pattern and then they broke that pattern and had some sort of surprise in there that wasn't expected. I mentioned this a little bit before, but ultimately it's about finding the line. There's a very fine line between what's kind of appropriate and what's inappropriate. Some brands are able to just flaunt that, like shipping their pants. they're just kind of like, whatever, our line is way the heck over here. We can kind of do whatever we want. We can make poop jokes, and that's okay. Some brands are a lot more serious and buttoned up, and so it's going to be a lot harder. Their line is going to be a lot further over to the other side, and they have to be aware of it. But anytime you're doing humor, you're kind of flirting with that line. You're figuring out what it is, and how close you can get to it, and maybe how far you can get over it. And again, it's about pushing the envelope, not burning it. If you get way too far over and you hurt your audience, like some of the other examples that I gave earlier, that they just went way past the line. They weren't even aware of where that line was, and it hurt them. So it's all about kind of figuring out where that line is and how you can kind of dance with it. And of course, you don't want to get HR telling you that it's really inappropriate. I also like to think of this as a little bit outside the box, a little bit different, but I like to think about humor as garlic. For anybody who likes to cook or likes to put together meals, garlic can be really great, or it can be really bad. If you put the right amount of garlic or any spice, garlic is just a very powerful, overwhelming ingredient to add to any dish. And so if you add too much of it, it's really overpowering. But it can add a lot of flavor if you do it in the right amounts. It's also not appropriate for every dish. You don't want to necessarily add it to your breakfast cereal, but if you added it to, pasta or spaghetti or something like that, like it can actually add a lot of flavor. So it's just thinking about it like that, like know when to apply humor and know how much is right. And sometimes a little bit goes a long way. So just be, dole it out sparingly and cautiously. Again, when it comes to marketing, it's also really good to start small, again, because you're just dumping it on there and you're going way past the line of what's appropriate for your audience. It can blow up back in your face, but if you take small steps and find little ways on your marketing and online channels, it can go really well and you can kind of build some traction there. So keeping your expectations low, knowing that it's a risk, and kind of being risk averse with it can benefit you in the long run. And yes, we're talking about practice. We're talking about practicing your humor and doing it over and again. And yeah, Allen Iverson, I think, was wrong, because practice is really important. And then the last kind of tip here is to get diverse input, because I think a lot of the brands that didn't do this well probably didn't talk to anybody about it. They just went with their gut and were like, yeah, this is going to be great. But get feedback from people. And then also, if you get pushback and you're not sure about it, it's okay to pull the plug. Like it's a risk, and so you have to be willing to dump the project if you realize, oh my gosh, this is going to offend a lot of people, or it's going to destroy our credibility or something like that. Just make sure that you're prepared so that when it's out there and you can embrace it and fully go after the crazy, but do your prep work beforehand by asking for a lot of different input and feedback, so that you can, again, be really excited about it and really go after it once you're confident that it's going to go well with your audience. So now that we have a little bit of tips about how to be funny, I thought it was appropriate to figure out where we can actually be funny in our marketing, because sometimes it's just really hard to figure out where you can start. And here are kind of some of those small places, some of those small pieces within marketing that I think we can start to insert little bits of humor here and there. So one of the places that I really like is website 404 errors. That's a place that people don't like to end up. It's, they usually end there by mistake. And so if you are a little bit creative with it, you can actually turn that disappointment into a smile or into a positive experience, not only from a design standpoint, but also just from a humorous standpoint. So here are a few of the ones that I've seen over the years. So we've got Pixar, tells you not to cry. Mediums was just a little bit more kind of clever, not as funny, but just, they've got something out there. And then the last one at the bottom is Taco Bell's. And if you actually go to their 404 page, it's an animated GIF of a taco walking and spilling his innards. So it's got a little bit of animation there that I wasn't able to capture. But again, just putting in a little bit of personality, a little bit of humor into something that otherwise could just be a boring or unexpected experience on your website. So that's one place that you can maybe add a little bit of humor. Another is out of office autoresponders. This is one that I like to use. Again, this is more personal, but I mean, you can put it on your business email, but it's just about communication. So I like to, I saw a friend do this a couple years ago, and it just, everybody always skips those boring, I'm out of the office from this date to this date, but you can make people actually pay attention to those a little bit more if you're a little bit more clever. And some of you may have gotten similar things like this if you've ever emailed me in the past, but this was one I did recently while I was on vacation. I said that a robot was answering my email, which was essentially true. And so, I don't know, it just was a little way to be tongue-in-cheek and to be clever and got people to maybe read my out-of-office reminders, or maybe just put a smile on their face. So again, a small way, low risk, but potentially high reward. I don't know. And it takes a little bit more time to write these than just the generic ones, but I think it helps stand out just a little bit more. Again, sprinkle it into your content marketing. So the places that you're already doing content like blogging, emails, social media posts, just finding small ways to work that in to what you're already doing. And I love the example of, here's another really good person who's actually a good influencer in the marketing humor space, the Marketunist. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but I love to check out his comments that are all about, it's cartoons that are geared right towards people who are in the marketing space. So talking to your shopping cart about their abandonment issues, because we all know about those automated emails for shopping cart abandonment. So it's just a kind of clever tongue-in-cheek little way of doing that. So if you're working that into your meetings, or you put one of these in your blog posts, or it's a graphic within one of your email addresses using GIFs or GIFs, I don't know how you pronounce it, whatever your flavor of choice, but using those in little ways on your social media. It's just a little way to be, again, a little bit different and stand out a little bit and figure out what works, and then just do a little bit more and figure out what your audience is, again, willing to tolerate. And then this is one of the ones that some people hate, some people don't love, April Fool's Day. But this is an opportunity to maybe be a little bit more playful and maybe try out things a little bit more, just because societally we're a little bit more willing to put up with silly things like rickrolling your boss on April 1st. And so, of course, one of the brands that is most well known for that, dating back all the way to 2000, is Google. They always do some sort of thing, and now people aren't falling for it anymore. They know Google does this, but it's still interesting to see what they're going to do on April 1st, because again, they've kind of created with this a little bit more of a playful, a little bit more human aspect to their brand. So again, April Fool's Day is one day a year that you can maybe try something that you weren't doing before. So that kind of wraps up some of the tips and tricks that I have around marketing humor. I did want to mention a few resources, just because I always like to share where I've kind of learned some of this information. So these are two fantastic books that I've read and highly enjoyed. Humor Seriously, that's a great look at kind of branding and humor. And then Outrageous Marketing, which is by Scott Dickers, who is actually the founder of The Onion. I think many people are familiar with The Onion and its satirical news. And so he's actually gotten into the marketing space and talks a lot more about how you can use some of those satirical ideas in business marketing, which I thought was really cool. So both really good reads there. And we'll go through this list. Again, the Marketunist is on there. Some of these others are quite funny. Great sites to kind of check out for marketing. And again, I will reiterate that you guys will have access to this slide deck afterwards. So you're obviously able to kind of go and click on each of the pieces there, as well as some of these articles that, again, I pulled some of the different ideas and pieces from. And as we wrap up, something that doesn't have anything to do with marketing, but is a shameless plug for my upcoming book, which will go on pre-sale next month.
Well, it has to do with marketing, doesn't have to do with humor.
Sorry, yes, I'm saying that. I've said both of those so many times, I'm just mixing the two of them up. It doesn't have anything to do with humor. Yes, thank you, Mickey. It has everything to do with marketing and how you can use storytelling, maybe even funny stories, for your business and for your agency in marketing. Yes. So shameless plug there. And then obviously you're welcome to use this QR code or link if you want to download the deck and get all this stuff, because I know I went through that very, very quickly.